So why do we use adventure in Christian ministry? There's a lot of ways we could answer that question, but during this section I'd like to build a theological and philosophical framework for why we want to incorporate experiential education components and adventure activities in our Christian ministry. The first way to start answering that question is to really look at Jesus' own life in ministry. Why did Jesus incorporate adventure and experience in his work? Now, remember that his disciples were teenagers or maybe in their 20s, and often in Scripture we see Jesus doing things with them, not only giving them content or lecturing them, but actually doing things with them. An example that comes to my mind is from Mark chapter 6, where we see a pretty well-known story that I'd like to revisit here for a few moments. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus and his disciples had been very busy, so busy that they didn't even have time to eat, is what the scriptures teach. And so Jesus went away to a lonely place with his disciples where they could get some rest. And the crowds had a different idea, however. They didn't want Jesus to rest. They followed him there. And so Jesus had compassion on them and he taught them. And after some time, his disciples asked Jesus, can you send them into the neighboring villages because they don't have anything to eat? And Jesus told his disciples to provide something to eat. This is the lead-in to the well-known story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 people. And as you'll remember, Jesus took a few loaves of bread and some fish that a young boy had and multiplied it for the crowds. You can read this passage in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 31. And after this meal had been served, after it had been eaten, the disciples collected 12 baskets of leftovers, essentially. And what I want to focus on here is what happened after that story. When we hear this story preached or taught sometimes, it ends when the baskets are collected and the 5,000 people have all been fed their meal for the evening. But what happens afterwards is actually really interesting and very informative for us in our ministries today. After it was over, Jesus sent the disciples in the boat across the lake where they would be able to then spend the next day, and Jesus went on the mountainside to pray. He first dismissed the crowds, and then he went on the mountainside where he spent time in prayer. In the middle of the night, it says, Jesus was praying, and he observed the disciples straining at the oars. They were rowing really hard, and they were apparently going into some kind of a headwind. It says, verse 47, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. And immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." In essence, this boat trip on the lake wasn't merely for transportation, it was also for teaching. There was adventure involved in that. The disciples were scared. They were rowing the boat, they were facing a challenge of the wind that was against them, and then they were scared because they saw what they thought was a ghost on the lake. And it's when they understood that it was Jesus coming out to them that they were able to relax a little bit, and they were completely amazed. Look how Mark ends this little passage. Verse 51, it says, "Then he, Jesus, climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened." Why did Jesus send them on the lake in the boat? It's because their hearts were hard. It's because they didn't understand his provision, his goodness, how God was really taking care of them and all the people they had just seen fed in this incredible miracle that Jesus had performed. This was a moment of experiential teaching. This was a moment of adventure that we read in the scriptures. So why do we include adventure in ministry? Well, the first reason is really because it's what we see modeled in Jesus' own life and ministry. It's one of the major educational strategies that Jesus had for teaching and training his disciples to have not only an understanding of what the kingdom is, but really how to live in the reality of God's kingdom. We also see how this episode engages the disciples not only in their minds, but also physically as they're rowing the boat, emotionally as they faced fear from the wind and from what they thought was seeing a ghost. It engaged them relationally, that they had to really interact with Jesus as a real person. It engaged them spiritually. Jesus wanted to address the hardness of their hearts, and instead of giving them a lecture, he put them in a boat. Why? Because it was a profound way to teach them. So during this section of this course, we're going to be exploring some of the biblical themes of experiential learning. Why do we use adventure in ministry? There's a lot of ways that we're going to be addressing that and giving examples and ideas for you in some of the coming lessons. It's because it will help cut through the distractions that are so prevalent in our world around us. It's because it's going to engage people holistically with all their being, not only their minds. It's not just giving them information. It's providing a context and an opportunity for relationship. It's providing a chance for God to transform their hearts. So we're excited to explore this topic more with you. So stick with us and let's get into the next lesson together.